So we've got a few new members, so I think it'd be good if they just introduce themselves briefly as well. So we've got Orla from Yorkshire Building Society.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Yes, this is my first meeting, so delighted to join. And I may be a bit quieter this morning than is my natural way of being until I work out how things work. So, but delighted to be part of this.
Great, thanks. Welcome, Orla. And Richard Mason from Burberry.
Hi there. Yes, so Richard Mason, I'm Senior Manager of Corporate Responsibility at Burberry. So based up in Yorkshire, but work on their national and global programmes. But yeah, pleasure to join you all.
Great, thanks, Richard. And Mark Cowgill.
Morning, everybody. Likewise to the other two, pleasure to be here for the first meeting.
Thanks. And Liz Niederland.
Hello, everybody. Yes, and same for me. So my first meeting. I'm the BT Group Regional Director for the North, but I live in Harrogate. So very, very pleased to be here.
Great, thanks. And welcome, Liz. And Claire Paxman.
Good morning, everybody. Same, likewise, great to be here. I'm Claire Paxman, Director of Strategic Initiatives from Paxman Scalp Cooling. And yes, that's absolute pleasure to be here. And again, like Ola, I may be a little bit quiet, but hopefully we'll be able to interject where necessary. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So this is, as you're aware, it's a public meeting, so it'll be live streamed on YouTube. There's two parts of me. There's actually a private part as well, which will switch off from the live stream, and we've got some important topics to cover. Can I just ask if everybody's got any particular peculiar interest that they need to declare before getting to the meeting itself?
None.
None. Okay, good. So I don't think there's anything that's confidential in this meeting. So I think everything on the agenda is public, so we're all good. If we can go to the minutes from the last meeting, can I just check if there's anything that we missed from the minutes there, or everybody happy with the minutes?
I just missed one attendee, which I will correct. Okay. So that's thanks. Nothing else.
Okay, thanks, Jeanette. Anything from anybody else? Okay, so in that case, let's move to the shares update. I think it's worth getting Alan just to give us a bit of an update from the LEP board and some of the topics that were covered there.
Oh, that's one thing. Sorry, Alan apologised. He's in another meeting.
Oh, okay. So I think Alan was going to give us a bit of an update on devolution and where we're at with the devolution. We'll cover some more of that later. Michelle, I don't know if you want to cover anything here.
I've got Ian to cover the recovery board.
Sorry, say that again.
I think hopefully we should have Ian.
Yeah, I can certainly cover off the recovery board, yes, if that's helpful. So
yes, that'd be helpful. Yes.
Well, I'll come on camera since I'm supposed to be. So people would probably be aware we have set up the recovery board and provide an update to the LEP board on that at the last meeting. The recovery board brings together, is convened by the 5 leaders of the West Yorkshire local authorities, and as well as bringing lots of other people together from across the region and across industry, business representation groups, and so on. The emerging themes from the recovery work so far is, in fact, what the region needs to address is we've got the same issues to address as we had before the coronavirus pandemic, about low productivity, having the right skills across the region, but it brings it into sharp relief the focus we need to put on those now. And the recovery board has identified 5 priority areas: business and innovation, employment and skills, inclusive growth, carbon and the environment, and capital and infrastructure as the key things where we need to have firm plans in place to address both the existing and the new issues that are coming out through the pandemic. The LEP and the combined authorities already put significant amount of interventions already in place, and that's later on the agenda. So the recovery board is really addressing, once the economy starts reopening, what is it we need to do to really cement the recovery. And we're just in the process now of engaging with all the panels across those priorities to start testing and challenging the emerging ideas that are coming out of that work. And we've got that's the topic of the private session later on, which we will then summarise, take into the plan, and present back through the LEP board for approval, with the aim of approving a first version of the plan at the combined authority at the end of July.
Great, thanks, Ian. And if I can just add to that, there was a lot of conversation around the opportunity that will be presented to us as we go into recovery. And the LEP's intention is to try and ensure that we're really focused on building skills and helping drive the skills agenda, because that's an important aspect of recovery, especially for those who been unfortunate in the virus and have lost a job. So there's a bit more to come on that soon. So with that, I think let's go to the next topic on the agenda, and I think we should have Peter on the line to give us an update on the economic reporting.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear,
Hello.
Peter. You good? Yep.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Economic reporting. So you should have received the paper by my colleague James Hopton on economic reporting. It starts on page 5 if you're looking at the consolidated agenda reports pack. What the paper does is, first of all, outlines the things that we're doing to monitor the economic impact of COVID. And secondly, it provides an overview of the impact to date. What I should say is that parts of the paper have been superseded because new data has become available this week. So I will very briefly bring you up to speed on some of the latest positions based on that new data. What I should say is that we do have relatively limited information, even at this stage, about how COVID is impacting on the local economy specifically. So in terms of the things that we're doing to monitor impact, we produce an economic bulletin every other week and a dashboard in the sort of intervening weeks. And that draws on the various intelligence from published sources, but also from the growth services interactions with business. There's an example of the bulletin in the papers that have been circulated. What I would say is that the latest version contains all of the new figures that I'm about to refer to in my sort of overview of the impact. That latest bulletin will be available on our website shortly, but if anybody would like to have it mailed to them directly, email to them directly, please let me know. So in terms of other things that we're doing, we're also developing economic scenarios, which I'll come on to later, and we're doing some primary research, particularly focusing on developing our understanding of the impact of COVID on travel behaviour. What I'll do now is turn to a quick overview of the impact of COVID on the local economy. Now, as James mentions in the paper, economic activity is down significantly, and he's presented a couple of examples there of footfall being down in Leeds city centre, also a large reduction in the number of journeys that are being undertaken based on M-Card concessionary travel pass data. That sort of picture is confirmed by the GDP data that people have probably seen was published this week. So output actually fell by 20.4% in April nationally, and that follows a fall of 5.8% in March. So they're record monthly falls, so a big decrease in overall economic activity. In paragraph 2.5 of the paper, James highlights the decline in hiring activity, in recruitment activity that we've seen locally, and that's to be expected because obviously many businesses have suspended operations due to social distancing regulations, and others lack the confidence to recruit staff because of concerns about the economic situation. It's worth alluding to some data that's become available at national level, official statistics around the number of vacancies, and those statistics show that the number of vacancies reported by employers fell by 60% between February 2020 and March 2020. So again, we're looking at record declines in recruitment activity. And within that, the hospitality sector was particularly hard hit, with a fall in vacancies of more than 90%, arts and entertainment down by 80%, construction down by around 80%. Now, we don't have that kind of official vacancy information at local level, so we rely on counts of online vacancies, and this shows a similar picture to the official data. So the number of online job postings has fallen by around 2/3 in Leeds City region in May compared with early March. Now, there are some signs of very modest recovery in the latest week for which we have data, which runs up to June the 7th. So it's growth of less than 10%. So there may be some signs of that situation bottoming out and starting to turn around. James also mentions the unprecedented increase in unemployment that we've seen in paragraph 2.6. James refers to April figures, but as of this week, we now have May figures as well. And between March and May, the claimant count of people who were claiming benefits because they were unemployed nearly doubled locally. So the number of claimants increased by about 63,000 or 93% in Leeds City region, by close to 50,000 or 87% across West Yorkshire. Now, those growth rates are actually slightly smaller than the national average, which was about 114%. A key point to note is that even though young people are less likely to be eligible for these types of benefits, the number of claimants aged 18 to 24 has also nearly doubled. And we estimate that the unemployment rate for young people is significantly higher than for other age groups. So we've got this real issue of young people being potentially excluded from the labour market. If we look at the ratio of unemployed claimants to vacancies locally in terms of online job postings, the ratio has gone from 2 claimants per vacancy in March of this year to a figure of around 10 claimants per vacancy in the city region as of May. So we've seen a big increase in the number of people competing for the available opportunities. There's also been an increase in universal credit, which is of interest because this benefit actually extends beyond the jobless to include people who are on low incomes, people in households on low incomes. So we've now got about 260,000 people on universal credit in Leeds City region as of May. And between March and May, the number of claimants increased by 103,000 or 66%. So again, big increases there. The paper also highlights figures around the number of people on furlough. So at the point that the paper was written, we didn't have local data on the number of people who are on furlough, but we do now, based on data from HMRC, which was released this week. So we've got we've got more than 250,000 people in West Yorkshire who are on furlough, and 340,000 people across the wider city region. So that's equivalent to about 28% of employees in both of those areas, and similar to the national average. We've got national data on the sectors that have the highest numbers of people on furlough, and the sectors are wholesale and retail, hospitality, manufacturing and construction. So we're talking about similar sectors to those that have seen the biggest drop in vacancies, which is not unexpected. I suppose the big concern about furlough is that because we've got large numbers on furlough, it creates a potential for a second wave of unemployment when furlough comes to an end. Many of those who are supported at the moment won't have a job to go back to. So that's something that we have to consider in our recovery planning. It's also worth mentioning that we've got a large number of self-employed people who are receiving assistance via the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme. Nationally, there are about 3.4 million people who are eligible, and 2.4 million people are actually claiming the support. In Leeds City region, we've got nearly 100,000 people claiming self-employment support. West Yorkshire, 73,000. And the value of the claims under that scheme are very large indeed. So Leeds City region, about 270 million. West Yorkshire, about 190 million. And as James highlights from paragraph 2.8 onwards, we've got a very challenging business environment that's underpinning this whole situation. So he cites the example of 20% of businesses that have temporarily ceased trading nationally, a spike in business liquidations, an increase in the number of businesses that have high risk credit ratings. And that's borne out by the feedback that we're getting from our LEP growth managers, who highlight that access to finance and cash flow are the main issues that are being raised in their interactions with businesses. And as James also highlighted, large sums are being allocated through the Small Business Grants Fund and through the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Business Grants Fund. James also highlights a couple of examples of the impact on individuals in terms of their well-being and personal finances. So finally, I'd like to turn to potential future impacts. So a range of published forecasts are now available, and most of them indicate a sharp fall in activity, economic activity in 2020. This is nationally, followed by a recovery in 2021. Now, the scale and impact of that, impact and timing of that recovery is highly uncertain for obvious reasons, because we don't really know how the sort of lifting of lockdown is going to proceed. So the Office for Budget Responsibility, for example, estimate that we'll see a contraction of about 35% in GDP in Q2 and 13% over the whole of 2020. So looking at the GDP figures that I cited earlier, that actually may be quite optimistic. In terms of unemployment, the forecasts tend to have a consensus here with an increase to around 10% in the unemployment rate, which then immediately starts to fall, but remains above pre-crisis levels for some time into the future. So what we're doing around this is working on a range of economic scenarios to take account of that uncertainty and give us flexibility in terms of developing our recovery plan. So that's it from me. Any questions or comments?
Yes, thanks, Peter. So any questions from any of the panel here for Peter? And obviously a pretty gloomy picture at the moment.
Hopefully we're seeing tentative signs of recovery in terms of recruitment activity as the lifting of the lockdown proceeds. Hopefully we'll see that sort of sharp upturn that some of the forecasts are predicting.
Yeah.
I think Councillor Hinchcliffe wants to say something.
Yeah, Councillor Hinchcliffe, come in.
Hi, thank you for that. Yes, it is rather stark, isn't it, when you see all those figures together? I think just from the purposes of this board, I think it just highlights how significant the work of this board will be over the coming months and years. And I think all the work we've done to show what works and what doesn't over the last few years is now going to be really relevant to us as we plan what to do. The devolution deal we've got coming around the corner. Obviously, we've got A/B later on the agenda, but we need to make sure that any resource we get has a significant portion of that goes into increased employment and skills activity in the region. And actually, obviously, we have to make sure that government realise how significant this is as a national investment as well. They need to put in national money to devolve on top of our devolution deal to make sure that everybody who's been displaced through this crisis has an opportunity to reskill and get into a job to keep their family with food on the table and money in their pocket. So I just wanted to highlight how significant these figures are really and what it means for us as policymakers.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Hinchcliffe. And I think we've got a terrific opportunity here as well, because we've talked about the productivity gap, we've talked about other issues, stubborn declaration, so on. And it's important that we can leverage the opportunity that this gives us as a recovery comes along. Was there somebody else wanting to come in there as well?
Oh, Councillor Wilkinson?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to just reiterate, really, I mean, I appreciate Peter's probably coming from a glass half full sort of viewpoint, but I think the issue we've got is that obviously a hell of a lot of people have been furloughed, and I think that is hiding the true scale of the unemployment issue that we're going to probably face further down the line, and I don't think we're going to really start to see exactly how stark that is until probably the end of July, when I think a lot of companies will then start making further decisions about having to lay off more people. So that's kind of the glass half empty viewpoint, I suppose.
I guess there's a potential for the
it's uncertain time.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Peter.
I was just going to say that there's a chance that the Chancellor may make the decision to further extend to furlough and taper it, because otherwise there'll be a lot of consultations starting around redundancies in the near future.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got to wait for each decision, and of course we're lobbying the best way we can. Okay, with that, I think we can move forward. Michelle, do you want to give us...
Rashik, I think Peter O'Brien had a question as well.
Sure, hi Peter.
Hi, sorry Rashik. Yeah, sorry, I've got issues with my camera, which is on my laptop, which is probably a good thing for everyone. You can't see me, but I just want very quickly to reinforce Councillor Hinchcliffe's message about resources. I mean, the Chancellor announced on the 11th of March, which seems an age ago now, kind of, initiatives and the scale of the challenges we face. Absolutely mean skills is going to be pivotal to getting us back on our feet. I think at the same time, those national funding programs and national initiatives, and also maybe those in the region as well, the more we can make a case for them to be much more flexible, agile, to kind of direct towards supporting that extra resource, I think is absolutely critical. So we get away from some of the rigidity, some of the kind of rules which we know maybe have hindered us up to date, to absolutely direct this where it's needed. So I think if this board again can do anything alongside making the case for much more resource, it's around let's find a much more agile, flexible way of delivering some of these existing streams, funding streams and programs. Thank you.
Absolutely, and be looking at these and be able to take any.
Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Sorry, apologies for coming in twice. But one thing I think we do need to be aware of is that the FE sector and HE sector are obviously financially hit, and we're going to need them quite a lot coming up. And therefore, I just wonder if there's something as a board we should do to lobby and push to make sure that there's some finance going into that sector quite quickly. I'm not sure, perhaps Rashik, you and I perhaps could do something in terms of letter writing to ministers, etc., because I just think that sector is going to be so crucial over the next few months.
Yeah, let's take an action on that. I think we should get together.
You're just breaking up there, Rashik.
For the minutes, sure.
Could anyone else hear?
Yeah, the employment skills programs update. Michelle, do you want to go to the next agenda item?
Absolutely, yeah, no problem at all. So the next two items, items 7 and 8, we will take together. So there's two papers here, the second of which gives you an overview of all of our employment and skills programs and activity since the last meeting. In the first paper, what we've done is drawn out that activity that is directly related to responding to the COVID-19 crisis, and that activity that we've managed to carry out already. As you're all very much aware, our employment skills activity is all externally funded, and we still need to meet funder requirements. And we've already had a mention of some of the constraints from Peter O'Brien around that. But we are pleased that as well as being able to meet those funding requirements, we've been able to flex and adapt our programmes quickly. So in the first paper, item 7, I wanted to draw your attention to point 2.6, which is about the employment hub. So we've been fortunate really in our region in already having a £9 million part European social funded programme delivered in partnership with our local authorities, very much collaboratively, which was aiming to broker employment and apprenticeship opportunities between individuals and employers. Having that programme has meant that we were able to adapt that very quickly to respond to the changing and immediate need of individuals and businesses. So we were able to broaden out the client group to support people who were either at risk of redundancy or on furlough or had already been made redundant, as well as the initial client group, and to put them in touch with businesses that were, with employers that were looking to recruit. And because there are employers from many sectors that are still looking to recruit, and certainly in the early days of the crisis, there was a massive recruitment need in logistics and retail, for example, which we were able to signpost people to. We continue to get a high level of demand from individuals, and we anticipate that continuing. An obvious point, however, is that there are limitations to that brokerage model, and it relies on there being opportunities in the labour market to match people with. If, as projected and as discussed by Peter, those opportunities in the labour market diminish, then our approach obviously needs to move towards job creation and stimulating the availability of employment and apprenticeship opportunities in the economy. But for now, there absolutely are opportunities to link people up with. And the local authorities have worked very quickly to respond and to adapt their provision alongside us. At 2.7, we talk about another one of our parts European social funded programmes, which is called Reboot. Again, we were very fortunate to already have this programme in place. So this panel had very much identified adult retraining as a priority before we went into this crisis. We would expect as officers that you would be putting in even greater focus on adult retraining in the current crisis, and particularly to support adults that are employed in sectors that are particularly under pressure at the moment. So what we've done through that Reboot adult retraining programme is we've launched 11 online courses, and we're particularly targeting with some really good marketing, targeting furloughed workers and recent graduates for whom entering the labour market at this difficult time is extremely challenging. And we're getting a really good response from individuals. So we've got over 100 individuals signed up to online retraining programmes, which are still carried out in the evening so that people who are working but are worried about the long-term prospects that they have with their employer can access those. We're really pleased to have that programme in place. Again, we could do far more. Because it's a European programme, it's relatively constrained. I won't go into detail but about qualifications and sectors. We could do far more with a greater amount of more flexible resource. And then the last thing I wanted to draw your attention to in that paper is at item 2.8. So we have responded to a call from our schools, the 180 schools we work closely with as part of our network, to help them to provide studying at home careers resources for young people. So our schools are particularly concerned about young people at those key transition points in their educational life, and particularly where we have previously intervened to support young people to gain meaningful access to employers. Obviously that can't happen in the way that it has done previously, and we don't want young people at those key transition points in their life at the moment to be disadvantaged in a way that might stay with them forever. So we produced studying at home resources in partnership with Burberry Foundation in some parts, which have been very well received by schools. We'll talk, so obviously this is the things we've already done, and we'll talk about recovery and get your steer about where you would like to see additional activity in the private workshop after that. In the longer paper, which follows, which is item 8, it gives you a thorough rundown of everything we've been up to since the last meeting, but I wanted to draw your attention to 2 points in particular. At point 2.17, we talk about our work to support apprenticeship levy transfer. At the time that we wrote the paper, we had seen large employers less keen to have those conversations. Obviously, the immediate challenge was very acute for them and other employers to deal with. But actually, since that paper was written, just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a marked interest from employers, from levy-paying, apprenticeship levy employers, in engaging with us regarding levy transfer, which is really, really encouraging. So we're working with a number of large employers that are very keen to now move quickly with that apprenticeship levy activity in order to keep their unspent levy payments here in the region and very much to support the recovery. So we're really encouraged to hear that and very keen to progress with those discussions, and would really ask for you to share the message among your networks that transferring unspent levy to SMEs is a fantastic way to support recovery. And then the point at 2.23 is about our Skills for Businesses programme. So we received the notification that we've been successful in applying for European social funding for that programme. We've postponed the start of it, as you would imagine, but the team have now been recruited and will be commencing in September. What that programme will do is support businesses to engage with the full breadth of the education system, with all the local authorities on our patch to discuss joint working, and those discussions have been tremendously supportive and fruitful. So they were the key areas that I wanted to draw your attention to, but happy to take any comments or questions on either the papers or what I've said.
Great, thanks, Michelle. I think it's encouraging to see all the range of work that the team's doing. So any questions from anybody here?
Sorry, I just had a quick one there. It's Richard from Burberry. Apologies, chat function. I'm using my phone, so it's not easy flipping between the chat function. Yeah, it was just around the apprenticeship levy. This is something we're actually looking into with the LEP at the moment at Burberry, but I was just wondering in terms of how that's progressing in terms of packaging that up, because I find it's something that a lot of companies are sat on and perhaps don't quite understand. It sounds like more are connecting now, but is that being packaged up into some kind of recovery model? Because it's one of those funds that is going to remain relatively untouched within the larger companies in the region. So where we may be seeing philanthropic efforts slow down, that isn't going to go away. So I just wondered if there was a move to try and perhaps package that up in a way that people could see it directly as a recovery tool.
You mean in terms of how we engage with levy payers around that offer?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that is the argument we need to be making, really, and it is slightly different from the case that we made to levy payers before this crisis hit. And I think that is absolutely the message that's resonating with those companies with whom we've picked up conversations. So you're right that's the approach that we need to take.
Yeah, I know for us, we were looking at it as a kind of, is there an opportunity to use it as a way of protecting skills in textiles, but it's just shifted now in terms of there's probably a stronger message around the urgency to protect that and within the region. So yeah, I can see a huge value in trying to package that up for people to recognise that.
Yeah, thank you. I think
Maren and then David, I think.
Yeah, you've got it.
Thank you. As well as my question, I think just on that previous point, I do think I'm picking up quite a few employers that were very good around the levy but just can't spend it at the moment. So I think it would be interesting to find out what is happening in terms of underspends on the levy. And the question I wanted to ask was partly a comment. I think we've struggled before in terms of where do we focus our efforts, as Michelle said. And I don't know whether we are going to have to be a bit ruthless about where we focus efforts. But I guess the other really bubbling concern that we've got is the 18 to 21-year-olds coming out of education and hitting a high unemployment market where skills are changing fairly rapidly. And I think whereas before we did quite rightly focus on reskilling existing employed adults, I just wonder whether we need to think of a bit of a stronger focus on what happens to people coming out into that high unemployment situation. And I was thinking, I was partly reflecting, in the 80s we had manpower services, youth training schemes, those sort of national schemes, which I know had differing views of support, but whether we could be looking at some of those sort of support measures. That was it.
Yeah, I mean, we have been expecting some time for government to make an announcement about a national scheme, and haven't had that yet. But we'll make sure that the board are aware immediately that we do hear anything.
It's whether we can do something locally as well, I think. Whether we need to put more of a focus on that, I'm not immediately sure what we would do, but just have that thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Rashik, I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting to hit the button. Yeah, I'm wondering whether we feature that in the letter that we might be writing with Councillor Hinchcliffe, whether that's one of the messages we put back into ministers more centrally. And then also, we may want to have a separate discussion with a small group on what actions we could take, what interventions could we actually do in the region, move small separately.
Yeah, that'd be really useful.
Yeah, David?
Yeah, just a comment really from a school leader perspective about 2.8. The virtual home learning careers resources are very much welcome and absolutely needed. And certainly from my school's perspective, this summer term is when we would do all the activity with year 10 and year 12 around engagement with employment, work experience. And so really we're looking at a generation of young people in those year groups who have not had those opportunities. And there's going to be a real tension when they return to school where probably what they actually need is well-being and reintegration work and big picture thinking in terms of their own careers and skills development. And schools will have a tension around that and the agenda around achievement in 2021. And how we resolve that is really critical, because my fear is that what we might do if we're not careful is magnify some of the disadvantage that is already there for the communities that I serve.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And as we look at the other topic, maybe we combine that aspect along with the topic that Maren just raised as well. Okay. Colin, you want to come in next?
Yeah, just to say on behalf of the colleges, thanks for the support, and it is much needed. And just a couple of things on the levy. We've been lobbying nationally to try and make sure that any unspent levy does come back into the skills system rather than disappearing back into Treasury. So any emphasis on that and help with that. And the rest of the comments are absolutely accurate. We're already seeing increased demand for full-time places in education, both from 16 to 18-year-olds and 18 plus, because they're not in jobs and they're not to the extent they were in apprenticeships, and that's all putting stresses on the system.
Yeah, I understand. Catherine, do you want to come in on the levy? I know you've put a couple of comments on the chat there as well.
Yeah, I can do. So we have got quite a lot of discussions going on, and we are, as Richard said, the concentration is really about please support us with the recovery, and we need to encourage apprenticeships across the patch. And whereas before we've noticed that businesses have been very specific about how they wanted to use that levy, I think it's important we just get it pooled and, as Colin's just said, retained locally. We are planning some communications and marketing moving forward that will build on the messages from those companies that are starting to pledge. So we've got true case studies, but I'd be happy to pick it up. I think I've got a meeting with Burberry next week, so we can explore that further as well next week.
Great, thanks, Catherine. So I think we've got Colin and Nav want to come in here. So Colin first. Sorry, I think that was Robert and Nav. I think it was Robert and Nav. So Robert first, yeah. Robert, you there?
Okay, I'll go. I'll go.
Yeah,
then.
go ahead, Nav. Yeah.
Robert can come afterwards. Thank you very much for the supportive comments from everyone. In common with most businesses, training providers are facing a lot of challenges over the next few months. Yesterday, the Association of Colleges, which is our national body, released a campaign called Rebuild, a Skills-Led Recovery. If it's okay with members, I'd quite like to circulate the press release for all to find out, because I think it tries to address all those areas, which obviously are common across the country. One very key point, I think someone mentioned earlier, is about the flexibility of those funds. Quite often when we have national funds, they come with strings attached that the people that can qualify for places have to be of a certain type. And really it just cuts down the flexibility that we can offer. So I'd like to forward that out to all members, and full support for trying to get some flexible monies from government. You might have noticed that there was £1 billion released for schools this morning, very heavily reported in the news. I'm sure that there'll be something for skills across the country, but I think we need to campaign to make sure that we can use it as flexibly as possible in Yorkshire.
Great, agreed. Thanks, Nav. Robert, do you want to come in? We may have lost Robert. Shall we move on? I think any questions around the employment skills plan itself, Michelle? I don't know whether you want to cover that now or with Sonia.
Sorry, Rashid. Can I just come in just on Nav's point? It's Councillor Rankin from Bradford. Just on that point about skills recovery plan, I understand 6th of July, I think, is what I've picked up. There's a date where the government will be announcing something around the skills recovery plan. So I think that's the one to watch out for.
Okay, no, thanks for that. Michelle, does Sonia want to cover the overview of the skills plan?
Yeah, absolutely. She's on the call.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So you panel members will remember that our last meeting in March, which was very much pre-lockdown, we agreed to refresh the employment and skills plan, which is due to expire at the end of this year. So that may seem like a lifetime ago, but we did agree that at this meeting it would be an opportunity for panel members to comment on a refreshed scope, vision, as well as an assessment of the priorities in the existing plan. So just like to use the time today to do that. So in your meeting pack, you will have received a PowerPoint that includes the context, the scope, and a high-level summary of the opportunities and challenges of the refresh. And alongside that, quite a detailed document at Appendix A, which I think starts at page 51 of your meeting packs, which presents a detailed assessment of all the priorities from the existing employment and skills plan, and will be quite key to this item. So the refresh we'll need to acknowledge both the significant progress which has been made in the region, many examples of which are included in the Word document at Appendix A, particularly around pages 65 and 66, as well as some of the significant changes in the landscape that have taken place since the last plan was written, including, of course, the revised draft priorities of the strategic economic framework, which include boosting productivity, enabling inclusive growth, delivering 21st century transport and tackling the climate emergency. And of course, since the last plan was written, we've secured an ambitious devolution deal that includes the devolution of adult education budget, and the refresh plan should also will also consider the findings of the Skills Commission, which is chaired by Councillor Hinchcliffe and has been working over the past year to develop a blueprint for a future-ready skills system, and will report this autumn with its final reports and make the case for greater coherence at a national level across the skills system, make the case for how we can achieve greater equality of access to skills, as well as a case for more local leadership and accountability and flexibility within our programmes, which we've heard quite a bit about already this morning. As of course, the current crisis and emerging plans for economic recovery has exposed just how much this is needed, so that local and combined authorities are able to respond to unprecedented changes in the labour market. So there will be an opportunity to consider that specifically during the private workshop. During this session, I just want to draw members' attention to two things in particular. So first of all, the proposed scope of the plan, which I think is on page 58 of your consolidated agenda packs. And two things in particular to bring your attention to. The first of all being the proposed length of the refreshed plan, which we are suggesting will be 5 years, which is in line with the last plan, of course, and also with the recommendation from the Skills Commission. So the plan would therefore run from 2021 to 2025. And the second thing to draw your attention to would be the proposed geography, which would be West Yorkshire, but whilst having regard for the programmes and projects that involve partnership work across the wider functional economic area, in particular European funded projects that have delivery in York and North Yorkshire. The second thing I'd just like to draw panel members' attention to is the draft vision statement, which is on page 61, followed by a description of what success would look like on page 62. And I'd just like to invite comments on whether panel members think that whether anything else should be included in the scope for the refresh of the plan, and whether the vision statement captures the ambition for employment and skills in the region.
Thanks, Sonia. So a couple of questions there to members on the panel here. Any comments or feedback on that? So anybody want to come in on this one?
Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Hello. I think it's good work, as you expect me to say, but I think just numbers. We're going to put some numbers in this because obviously the objectives are fine, but I think we do need some measurables, and perhaps there's a document underneath this which is probably more detailed in terms of numbers and making sure we have something to aim for, where we have obviously realistic but smart objectives as usual. But it'd be helpful to have those and just to focus the mind a bit. Thank you.
Yep, good advice. Anything else from anybody else?
Councillor
Can I come in, please, Rashid?
Yep, great.
Just reading the page 61, where we want to be. Did I hear you say that that's a vision statement?
on page, let me just, I think the vision statement's within the slides.
Is that on page 61?
Yes, it is.
My only comment would be a vision statement is normally all positive, and you wouldn't normally have a negative statement in a vision statement like the sort of second bullet point. Personally, I'd like to see that reworded in a much more positive way, or removing, because it just drags it down when everything else is, why do you want to live anywhere else other than here?
No, that's a good point. Okay. We'll have a look at that. Okay. Thank you. Any other comments, suggestions? So Sonia, in terms of coming back to the panel, when can we expect to see a refresh? I think it'd be good to see the metrics piece, as Councillor Hinchcliffe was saying as well.
Absolutely. I'd like to just go through some of the existing priorities and a rough assessment that we've undertaken with some of our key partners this morning, if I may. The idea then is that we would consult widely through focus groups with key stakeholders, as well as having a bit of an online survey that allows a broader audience to comment on what the priorities should be. And then at that stage, we will look at how we can measure the success of those priorities. And I would imagine that we would be bringing a paper to the September meeting to engage with this panel on proposed metrics.
Is there any value in having specific panel members to consult before or separately as a individual? So I think if there's anybody in the panel feels that I want to have a separate session with Sonia, I think that'd be useful. I guess you can either volunteer now, or if you want to come back to Sonia separately, that's also fine. Yep. Liz had a question about industry sectors. Liz, do you want to come in on that?
We've got some obviously sectors defined in the vision, and I just wondered if there's any further definition of the types of skills that each of these sectors require.
There is a piece of work that we need to do, particularly with our other policies and strategies, in particular the ones that we have around clean growth and digital, where there needs to be a clearer read across, I think, within the refresh, where there's been specific pieces of work within sectors and other plans. So yes, we need to make sure that that's clearly in the refresh plan.
I would add to that as well, Liz. Obviously, you're relatively new to the panel, but panel members who've been with us for some time will remember that Peter Glover, who spoke earlier in this meeting, produces an annual labour market analysis, which goes into significant detail about supply and demand for skills, including in key sectors. So we're very fortunate that in our region we've got that resource and a strong evidence base. You saw a summary of that at your induction call last week, but we'll be due to refresh that in the autumn. But yeah, we're fortunate that we've got that strong evidence base. But I suspect that we need to relook at some of that in the context of the current situation.
Yeah, I think Peter wants to come in with a comment.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Sonia, for the update on the plan. Just under comment I want to make is just under the building workforce skills and attracting talent section of the plan. I'm really pleased to see the focus on bringing together a much more stronger relationship between skills and innovation and leadership. I think that's absolutely critical. So the more we could do that, and the more that the Business Innovation Growth Panel, which I also sit on, can kind of work closely with this panel, this board, I think is going to be key. And just on the point that the title there talks about attracting talent, I think that's going to be really critical as well, to demonstrate that the Leeds City region, the region is kind of open, if you like, for attracting that talent. And certainly from a higher education perspective, last year, our universities in the region enrolled over 34,000 students from outside the UK, and this is a real critical issue for us to make sure that they recognise that universities haven't been closed, they've been open, but obviously there's a massive public health issue and people have got to come back safely. But to try and attract that talent through whatever way, through our people who live here, who work here, but also from outside the region, I think is an important message within the plan. So I think it's a really good start, and we've had conversations, Sonia, and happy to kind of continue and build on those through our university members. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Peter. I think Councillor Hinchcliffe wants to come in with another comment.
I wasn't going to bother you actually, I was just going to put it in the chat, but it just going on to Lizzie's point about the sectors. It says health tech, but actually the industrial strategy makes it clear that it's health. It's not just about health tech, which is quite narrow. It's about population health. It's about all the investment that's coming through in health into the region for Department of Health, and healthcare as an employment sector is going to be huge as well. So I just don't want us to be too narrow focused on that health tech sector.
Great. I totally agree. Thanks. Okay, any more questions or comments here? Okay, so got a few things to pick up on, Sonia. We can follow that later. Lindsay, do you want to come in on the adult education budget with devolution and provide an update there?
Yeah, absolutely. Morning, everybody. Nice to see the odd cat saying hello to us in the last few seconds as well. You weren't alone. So thank you. First of all, before we kind of go into the main meat of this update, just to say thank you very much for everybody who attended and then subsequently fed back. I know we did quite a bit of work in between the last panel meeting, trying to work up the AEB draft strategy. That is now out for consultation, and all of your feedback was incredibly helpful in getting that in the right shape before it went out. So, needs to be said first. So as I said, the consultation on the draft AEB strategy went live on Monday, the 25th of May, and that's open until the 12th of July. We've also, as well as having the online consultation, we've had some really focused sessions with all of the different local authorities to get more detailed feedback. We've had a session with college principals and also with WILP to try and really dig into some of the issues for certain stakeholders in the sector, as well as obviously hearing and clarifying some of the points with the strategy and seeing how that might impact on the different stakeholders. We have a session set up with our colleagues at DWP and Job Centre as well, just thinking about how their client group, particularly with the situation we find ourselves in, it'll be more and more pivotal to understand how that client group will be able to access adult education budget and make sure that the strategy makes that clear and as open access as possible. So that's planned in, and the other meetings have been held. We're also running some focus groups with learners and employers, with learners being the key stakeholder really. Within for the adult education budget, we're keen to understand how current learners are accessing the funding, accessing learning programmes, the positive elements they find within the system and the service they're currently receiving, and any changes that we might be able to make that would improve the opportunities that they can access. So they're scheduled for, I think, the week commencing July, just before the consultation closes. So what I thought might be useful just in the time that we've got this morning, I'm just going to share some of the initial bits of feedback that we've had from our focus sessions. Just some of the highlighted points. Obviously, we've had quite a lot of feedback and a lot of things that we need to consider in the round in terms of how we update the strategy moving forward before it comes back to this panel and to the combined authority. So if you just bear with me while I share my screen. Elia, I think it's saying host is disabled participant screen sharing. So in which case, I'll point you to the relevant part of the strategy in your document pack that you should hopefully have in front of you. So the first, one of the first things that we focused on is priorities, which are on page 7 of the strategy. And I think that's page 82 of your collective pack that you have in front of you. So, so as you'll be aware, and you remember from the previous sessions, what we've done is although ideally, as we have said many a time, what we would have done is had the employment and skills plan drafted first, and then we would have created an AEB strategy that sits underneath that. Because of the timings to do with devolution, we've had to develop the AEB strategy first, but it still does very much sit within that employment and skills plan. AEB is one component, one funding stream within the wider skills system that the employment and skills plan talks about. So we've tried to make sure that the priorities within this AEB strategy really talk about what AEB can achieve, so that you'll see there's less to do with sort of high level skills, because that's not so much within the scope of adult education budget, and the priorities really hinge upon the key elements that the budget is focused on, and the eligibilities and entitlements that sit within that funding. Generally, the priorities have been pretty well received. There's been some comments, I think, particularly on the third priority, which is about making learning more inclusive to support disadvantaged residents and then widen the pool of talent for businesses. There's a bit of concern that all of the priorities seem to talk very much about the immediacy of employment as a progression, and that we need to recognise that that there's a big place for community learning, for first step learning, and for progression to further learning as well. Thinking about the employment opportunities that we might see, or the lack thereof potentially that we will see in the region moving forward, and how we really support those who are furthest from the labour market in their forward journey. So I think there'll be probably a little bit of rewording that we'll look at in terms of those priorities. But generally, we also had some discussion, and you'll remember from the initial feedback session, about trying to rank the priorities in order of importance. There's a really strong feeling from all of the respondents we've spoken to so far not to rank them, particularly at this point, and that actually having them worded as they are, and leaving them sort of open for us to prioritise as and when we need to, responsively, with the funds, depending on where the economy is and the needs and demands that we have within the system at the point that we take on devolution. So I think that's something that we have asked for a bit. We've asked for more comments on that within the online consultation, but I think that's a fair point to be made. We're all very aware of how fluid things are at this point in time. But we will be looking to take on adult education budget on the 1st of August 2021. So there's hopefully a lot of recovery to occur in that point in time. But if not, there's certainly going to be very different challenges to what we're facing at this point in time. The other area just to look at it's on page 22 of the strategy, and I think that's 97 of your consolidated pack. And this is the routes for funding. So this is the idea that we will roll over grant allocations for those providers who already have a grant allocation that are based in West Yorkshire, in order to support that travel to learn issue that we've spoken about before, and not tie ourselves in knots with something called with cross-border learners. We've proposed that we continue funding Leeds City region-based providers who have a grant allocation just for their direct activity, but not their subcontracted activity. And then everything else would go out for contract for services. Again, generally, this has been quite well received. We haven't had much negative comment on the proposed route. I think people find it quite clear. They understand the rationale that sits behind this commissioning principle. The main concern that we've had, particularly from the grant providers, is looking at the cut of data. We've been really clear in here that we would use 17-18 data. That's the allocation that we're being given from Department for Education. That is when they cut the data. So that is where we've sort of drawn the line to say we will give out those allocations in real terms. And I know many colleagues on the call will echo this. That could mean a serious cut to some of our colleges and some of our local authorities in terms of the funding that they have managed to achieve of growth in the subsequent years. And obviously something that we don't want to be, that doesn't want to be the narrative that we're talking about from devolution, a cut in that kind of public provision, or a loss of opportunity for learners. So it is something that we need we're looking at, sort of Peter and myself, in terms of number crunching to see what the cost would be in the system and how we can maybe respond to that. As we've said, all of the funding within, we are allocated the 17-18 pot. So to put growth in one area does mean that there is funding leaving another set of providers. We're hopeful that our idea of sort of recycling the subcontracting from those out of area providers, that we're not, the ASVERI grant providers, that we're not automatically continuing their contract, that'll enable us to afford to make an advance perhaps in that 17-18 funding. But that's certainly come back through very strongly within consultation. The responsiveness pot that we've mentioned in this kind of Route 3 has been really welcomed. The idea that we'd keep a little bit of funding back until August 2021, and we'd either be able to target that responsively based on the needs at the time, or that might be, if there's no clear gaps seen, that really that could just be awarded as growth to potential providers. But that was welcomed and made clear that it should be available across all the routes, so for grant providers and for contract for services as well. So again, that's something for us to consider. I think that had been our intention in the way that we'd written the strategy, but perhaps isn't clear in how it's presented on that page. In terms of the features of the approach, generally, we've had a really positive conversation with local authorities in terms of the involvement that they'd like to have, particularly in that procurement of that Route 3 we've just discussed. Looking at how we can utilise the existing boards that occur in local authority areas and either feed into that, or look at the membership in terms of reference of these partnership boards that we want to create. But I think there's a real welcoming of the idea that we'd have those boards where our providers get to join together and look at the provision across the area and make sure that it's all tying together as well as possible. There's been quite a lot of discussion on the level 2 entitlement extension that we mentioned in the strategy, with the idea and the ambition that we would like to extend that from being an entitlement for people aged 19 to 23 to being an entitlement for people of all ages. There's a strong feeling that given where we are now and given the challenges that will be faced, knowing that at the moment about 70% of the budget goes to employed people. I say at the moment, that was our last cut of the data, so that really is likely to increase considerably over the coming years. So there's a call to, although there's an agreement with that ambition, that perhaps it should be something that we look at in subsequent years and not in year one, because we're aware of the many demands on the adult education budget pot. And I think a very clear message from all of the consultation meetings is that all providers are very keen for growth. So that's obviously something that we need to bear in mind, that we do have that limited pot, but we do have providers who are really challenging and pushing to deliver more and support our learners in different ways. So that's our challenge in terms of lobbying and in terms of how we talk to government about wider funds in the system. So that's sort of a bit of a high-level summary of some of the consultation. We have got a company attended, and we have an external company providing analysis on all of the consultations, and they will be facilitating the focus groups of learners and employers. They will be providing back to us a report with recommendations for change towards the end of July, which gives us August to look at the strategy, amend the strategy and respond to those recommendations. We will, of course, be sharing that draft back with yourselves as the panel, and it should go to the Combined Authority for ratification on the 4th of September, which will allow us to then go out for procurement on the 1st of October is the intention. So we are, although obviously everything hinges upon the redraft of the strategy and making sure that we're responsive in this consultation and that we make the right changes and that needs to be ratified by the combined authority. We are preparing the procurement because we have to within the timescales that we are challenged with. So a prior information notice will be going out within the next weeks, just so that we can assess the market, the number of providers that would be interested in tendering for that contract for services element of the adult education budget. We've got quite a job on to write the funding rules and get all our contracts ready by October. So although it may seem a bit previous that we're doing this preparation work, we absolutely have to in order to meet the challenging timescale of getting things procured at the start of October, running through to March, and then ready for August. So I think that's pretty much everything in terms of a quick summary of progress and where the consultation is for me. If there's any questions or comments.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I think that's an excellent summary. It's good to see the progress here. So questions or comments for Lindsay on this? You've stunned everybody into submission on this, Lindsay.
I spoke too quickly, maybe.
Rashid, can I just come in? I mean, I welcome that. I think that's it's actually a really good summary in terms of where we're at and where we're going with this as well. And I do welcome the fact that local authorities obviously have had a lot more input into this, because I think obviously local authorities know their areas quite well, and what we don't want to do obviously is reinvent the wheel. So we've got to make best use of that local knowledge. So I think the fact that we are all working together on this, I think is welcomed, and thank you for that.
Great, thanks for the confidence here. Any other comments or questions?
Rashid, just one quick point. Please don't take the lack of conversation as being a lack of interest. It's just that Lindsay's handled the consultation so well, we've all been given an opportunity to feedback.
No, I know that. I've seen some of the work that Lindsay's been doing, and it's great. Great to see, and great testament to the professionalism and dedication on this. So it's good. So good homework, Lindsay. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
So with that, I think that's the last topic for the agenda. And Michelle, is there anything else that we want to cover whilst we've got everybody together here?
I guess the only thing that I would be keen that we mentioned before we close the public part of this meeting is that this would have been the last meeting for Professor Margaret House, who unfortunately has sent her apologies for this meeting, but who is retiring. So I think that the panel would want to thank her for her committed service to this panel and our work. And of course, Diana Towler from DWP is also retiring. She's been a real friend to the team, and so as in between the panel meetings where obviously she's contributed greatly, she's also been a great link for us as officers with JCP, and also the local authorities have all got strong relationships with her as well. So I think the panel would probably want to give both Margaret and Diana their best wishes and their thanks.
Absolutely, yep. And from me, I thank both of them. It's we've worked closely together, especially with Diana. We've had a strong relationship with Diana for some time. So yes. Okay, with that, we've got the next meeting. Hi, Diana.
Hi, just to say thank you, and I've really enjoyed working with you. But life goes on, doesn't it? Thank you, Rashid and Michelle.
Life does go on, but we know your number, so we'll still call you, don't worry.
Happy to discuss anything with you, Rashid.
Great, thanks, Diana. Yeah, we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
So I think the next meeting we've got on the 14th of September, Councillor Wilkinson wants to come in with something.
No, just say I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave at this point due to other commitments.
No worries. Okay, thanks for joining. Yes, we've got the next meeting on the 14th of September, and then there's the one after that on the 25th of November. We're not sure whether those will both be Zoom meetings or face-to-face, but we'll find out when we get nearer the time, I suspect. So I think that concludes the